Hei og velkommen tilbake. I'm going to introduce you, Lynne, briefly. So Lynne Sachs made the last film we just watched called A Month of Single Frames. Experimental filmmaker, poet, based in Brooklyn. And now you're in California.
Yes, I am, which is very appropriate because this is where I met Barbara Hammer. Not in this room, but in this city.
Amazing. Thank you. And thank you for taking the time to be here tonight. I think I'm going to dive straight into it, and then we're going to have a chat. We're going to have a few questions for you, and then maybe we open up to the audience and ask if anyone's got any questions, if that sounds good. Amazing. We started off watching Dyke Tactics tonight. And I mean, that is Barbara Hammer's kind of breakthrough films and what she became quite well known for. And I believe that made quite an impression on you as well when you first saw it.
That's a great place to start. And I'm going to say a few things about Dyke Tactics. Actually, Barbara Hammer and I went to the same graduate school, San Francisco State. So I was told last night by people who know her work well, that she made it while she was in the university. So it was very much part of her discovery of the medium, simultaneous to her discovery of how she could, as an artist, articulate her life as a lesbian. I should also add that the first time I saw it, I recognized someone in the film. I had actually never seen her nude before, but I recognized her. And her name was the woman was Christine Saxton, who was actually a teacher at San Francisco State, but around the same age as Barbara. And sadly, one of the ways that I got to know Barbara and got to know Christine Saxton better was because she had ovarian cancer in the mid-'80s. So there were a group of us who were part of her support team, that would go to her and bring food and meals. And, who knew that 20 years later, Barbara would have the same condition or diagnosis. So that was kind of the beginning. I actually honestly did not see Dyke Tactics till maybe 8 years ago. The first film that I saw of Barbara's, which was as explicit as Dyke Tactics, was a film called Nitrate Kisses. And I wanted to tell you about the experience of that film. So the film premiered in 1992 in San Francisco in an enormous theater, like the size of an opera house. And it was absolutely filled. And this was in it was called the Castro Theater, and it was in the Castro neighborhood of San Francisco, which at the time, and probably still, was known as a gay neighborhood, and really mostly gay men. So the room was filled with mostly gay men watching Barbara's film, which depicts senior women or women well into their lives, like in their 80s and 90s, having sex. And the male audience could not handle it. And it might have been because they were women, but I also think it was because of their age. And it was like seeing their grandmothers have sex. And it was like too much for them. And I will never forget that because it was very uproarious. And, her work is so expressive and so committed to talking about all aspects of life, including sexuality, but not in a negative or like prurient way, but in a celebratory way.
Amazing. I absolutely love Nitrate Kisses, and I wish we could have shown it tonight, but it's a documentary and it's quite long, so we would have been here all night if we'd shown it. But I think maybe Barbara Hammer's reception was quite different when she was first shown in Oslo. I think you have a bit of an anecdote on that.
Yeah, because when we wanted to have this program on Barbara Hammer, we started digging into the reception of her films, and we found her notes from a screening in Oslo back.
Good research.
Yeah, so that was it was in 1982 at the Women's Center in Oslo, and in her book, Making Movies Out of Sex and Life, She wrote that the audience, they were quiet and respectful, but she didn't trust the response. She asked them if they were shocked, and they shook their head saying like no, but one person in the background was screaming yes. And she said that the rest were lying because they were trying to be nice. So that's one way it was kind of received in Norway, at least, but she kept on screening films in different cities across Europe. But do you have like any thoughts about like the reception of Hammer's film?
I think that is a very, very revealing moment about the times. And I think there's something to say about the way our culture has changed. For example, there's the word intersectionality that we talk about now, so that one can embrace one's life as a woman, but you can also be as engaged with your life in terms of your sexuality, whether you're trans or you identify as queer, and that those are simultaneously significant and impactful one on the other, rather than exclusive one from the other. And I think that she was really breaking ground in that way before that term was even part of a shared vocabulary. Are you hearing a lot of noise out there right now? I can close the window.
I hear something, but I don't
think it's close the window.
All right.
I was showing off the nature, but then the sirens started. So, that's actually much better, I think. Anyway, and I would, for example, I in the 90s, I presented a film like you two by a Black, queer identified and experimental filmmaker named Marlon Riggs. Have you heard of his work? You know, he was really, really important for bringing all of those sensibilities together. And I showed his film on Valentine's Day in Florida. And so a large Black audience came and a large gay audience came, and they did not connect. They did not like the same thing. They did not respond well to one another, even if there was just like a lot of tension. And when I think back on that, I think that audiences and even ourselves, we've developed to allow for a complexity of experience that Barbara was already exploring really early.
Yeah, and I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about her practice as a filmmaker that was also a performer, an activist, a painter, she did so much more than just being a filmmaker. And I'm thinking about her work, if you can kind of summarize it, and like how would you characterize it? I'm thinking of it always as kind of playful and curious and deeply personal, but also kind of maintaining this experimental side throughout. And I think when we last spoke, you spoke a little bit about how she was not only just an amazing storyteller, but also like technically mind-blowing and skillful. And that's how you got to know her?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to say there are quite a few films in your program that I hadn't seen before. And one of them was Sync Touch. Oh my goodness. That film is fantastic. And it really encapsulates everything you just said, because the beginning of it is about that brush stroke, is about the tactile experience of making art. And yes, she had studios and closets and archives full of her paintings. She wanted to have that haptic connection that in some ways film is not really as usually as prone to allowing for an artist. There's a little bit, especially now with digital, but she always wanted that tactile synergy, we'll call it. So when I saw Sync Touch, I just was completely fascinated. And then I was surprised because the second half is quite different, and it's very cerebral. It's very much about what we call feminine écriture, and she's even talking about but by you hear her trying to say these words in French, and she does a good job, but she doesn't do a perfect job. And I love the flaws. I mean, I think that's a signature of a film essay, that you have your own insecurities. You reveal that you, as you said, the word curious. She was curious about what had been called in those years by the French, like a feminine way of writing and thinking and exploring language. And so she shows us, in some sense, or performs her own curiosity and her own education.
Amazing. Give me any thoughts?
Yeah, and I was wondering about the shift kind of in Hammer's practice. Like, she's very well known for her films from the 70s, and then in the 80s she kind of turns away a little bit away from the body. Can you kind of describe what you believe happened in her practice and how you kind of see it?
I think at Barbara's core, she was committed to introducing, and I really mean it when I say introducing, lesbian life to the world through her art. So she was doing that in a kind of somatic way in the 70s. Like, here is how we connect physically. Here is how we find a correspondence between the camera and between our arms and our vaginas, and that we're looking at each other. She'd probably read Laura Mulvey's essay on visual pleasure. She was thinking about a confrontation with the male gaze, which was the term that Laura Mulvey had coined in this seminal essay on narrative film, but it could be applied to any image, that even when women make images, women had been trained to convey a male gaze. And she did not want to do that. She was looking for a way to challenge that in every manifestation of her cinematic practice. So she did that through the image, and through all of this experimentation, she revealed what had not been revealed. But then she decided that she wanted to reveal the stories of women she admired, women who had lived lives that had been very much about the struggles and the joys of being a woman artist, of being a thinker, of being a poet. She made a film about the poet Elizabeth Bishop. She made a film about Maya Deren. She made a film about the French, call it conceptual thinker, photographer, trans person, Claude Cahun. So those were all other ways of exposing what it was to be a woman, or specifically a lesbian woman. And I think she wanted her work to have an impact in kind of the long history of culture. So those documentary films could feel less personal, in the sense that she might not be, or she's in them, but not as much. They're not about her sexuality, but they're about her vision and her compassion for a society that she wanted to wake up.
Absolutely. And I was just thinking about your work and relating to this, and how in the films we watched tonight, you have these films from the early 70s that are deeply provocative, and then in the 80s she moves more into kind of abstraction and media focused work, and like really looking at the materiality of film. Then in the 90s she got these documentaries, and the 2000s becomes more about kind of creating her legacy. But I was just thinking about what we've shown tonight, and the second half of it, which got the A Horse Is Not a Metaphor, and is it Sanctus? Yeah. And how she kind of looks at mortality, and how this has always kind of played a big role in her practice, but especially in these later films. And then I was just wondering about, the time when you came into making a month of single frames, at a time when she had been ill and she was ill again, and it was a particular time of her life. And I was just wondering whether you could tell us a little bit more about how this collaboration came about.
Certainly. So Barbara was first diagnosed with ovarian cancer around 2007 or 8, I believe. And so my husband, Mark Street, who is also a dear friend of hers, and he made a film with Barbara as well, and I'll get to that. But we would take her meals, and we were very keen on being part of her support team, call it. And she really appreciated that, because she was quite honest that some of her nearest and dearest friends were still good friends, but they didn't know how to reckon with cancer. You could say death, but it was also the word cancer can throw people off. So they wanted to be in her sphere, but maybe for whatever reasons they had their own personal experiences, something about that it was too haunting. So she was very grateful for that. And that brought us to being closer to her. And then in 2018, she really saw, as we said, the writing on the wall. She saw that she was near the end of her life. She'd worked hard on her legacy, but she had 4 projects that had not been completed. And instead of just relegating that material to an archive of a shelf of unfinished projects, she wanted them done. In a sense, she wanted, let's say, imagine posthumously, she was imagining 4 premieres of her work without being there, but she was up there like giving her blessing or something. So she gave me this, and I say beautiful, almost like in quotes. She gave me this footage of her month in a cabin or a shack, dune shack, she called it, without any electricity or water. And she said, do whatever you want with it. So I watched it. And of course I said, that's beautiful. And she said, yeah, that's the problem. It's too beautiful. I never knew what to do with it. This was 20 years after she'd shot it. She said, it didn't seem important. As you mentioned earlier, she had gone through a period where she was trying to change the shape and the understanding and of a global understanding of what lesbian life was. And this wasn't going to do that. It didn't have that gravitas. So she said, figure something out. So I decided that I would edit it, and then I would try to, in a sense, take it a little deeper. So I said, did you keep a journal or anything during your 1 month residency? And she's like, oh yeah, I forgot. I kept a journal. So she just pulled it out, and I had no time to read it. I had to find the pages. Like, she gave me about 30 minutes to find what I wanted her to read out loud. And I should say that we haven't even talked about this. Barbara is a fantastic writer. She has published books, and her script is beautiful too, I'll add, but her ability to look in at herself in both the first person and the third person is kind of unfathomable. It's so rich and so beautiful, like, I won't say beautiful anymore, but so profoundly are expressed. So I think I found material that actually worked. But then I needed to take it to one other place. And I needed to figure out we talked about like the haptic, or like where was metaphorically my fingerprint on this communication with her, other than just talking to her and editing the film. So that's when I added the text on the screen, which I thought gave me a chance to think about film epistemologically. It gave me the chance to think about how that landscape and the environment had changed, how she had changed, how she was with us but not with us. So it's like a more of a text-based or epistolary communication between the two of us, and then with you. So when I say you, I mean the audience, or in English, you can also be one, like anybody or the idea of another person. So that's how we work together. She never saw the film finished. I did show her like a super rough cut, and she made one little suggestion, and but her partner Flory Burke was the premiere was at the National Gallery in Washington. We all went down there, had a great time, and we gave many toasts for Barbara, and it hadn't been very long since she had died.
And this film is kind of a part of the legacy of Barbara Ham, as part of her story now. And you also established an award for Hammer. Can you say something about that?
Yeah, sure. So A Month of Single Frames screened at the Oberhausen Film Festival in Germany, which is one of the oldest festivals in the world for short films. It's been around, I think, for about 50 years. And I knew the film was showing there, and it was in 2020 during the pandemic, so I definitely could not go. But I had actually forgotten that they had a competition. So I got an email from the director of the film festival, and she said, your film won the City of Oberhausen prize. So I thought she was telling me that the people in Oberhausen really liked the movie.
Great.
Yeah, great. And then she said, please, join me at the prize, at the kind of awards ceremony virtually. And it was there that I realized that the film had actually won the grand prize of the whole film festival, which happened to be quite a lot of money so I decided, or I didn't decide, it was clear that I had made it with and for Barbara Hammer. And so I gave half of the money to the creation of an endowment for an award that is given by the Ann Arbor Film Festival, which is kind of like a sister film festival in the United States. It's the oldest festival of short film here. And so just last week, they gave the second annual Barbara Hammer Feminist Film Award. And so I think it's to an Iranian filmmaker, and I haven't seen the film yet, so I hope they'll send it to me. I'm sure they will. But one thing I want to say about the Feminist Film Award is that it's for the film that the jury decides has the clearest and most, effective feminist theme or investigation, but it doesn't need to be by a woman. So I will be happy one day if it just so happens that a man makes that film, but so far it hasn't come true. So that's the award. Yeah, we've actually raised half again as much. So they have plenty of money for at least the next 15 years.
So they got a chance then.
Yeah, they
I'm just wondering whether we should ask the audience whether they got any questions.
That would be great. I wanted to point out that tree behind me, that's why, is a redwood tree. It's one of the most famous California trees, and you don't see them anywhere else in the United States. It's really tall, and it's the kind of, Barbara loved nature. She had a home in New York City, but she also had a getaway to the country, and not just. You saw in A Horse Is Not a Metaphor. She had a relationship to the land and to animals and to gardening. So that tree is here for her.
It's beautiful. I'm also quite jealous that you're right now in California and we're here. Did we have any questions? Or shall we? I'm just wondering how we're doing for time as well.
Here's a question.
Oh yeah, okay.
We got time for a couple.
Maybe we can turn around. Do you mind if I turn around the screen, Lynn?
Oh, I want to see the audience.
Yeah, I'll show you the audience. They're much more interesting than I am. Oh yeah. So we lost quite a few after the film's finished screening, but these are the remainers.
Thank you for toughing it out.
Yeah.
So is this working? No? Looks like it should be on.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, very well.
So actually, I just had to raise my hand when no one else did. I don't come from a film background at all. I come from a completely different field of art. But I was really struck by the tactile qualities in many different ways. And also, my question would be about the close-up, this sort of a tenderness that struck me, that I think has to do with the close look on everything. So can you, to someone really not familiar with filmmaking at all, is there something to say about the effect of close-ups?
I think that's just a fantastic question, and I think it's very observant in relationship to Barbara's work. You know, you see her fingers moving in paint. You see her fingers or other women's fingers moving across across skin, and it's there is a kind of, as you said, tenderness to both gestures, making them not feel very, very different, as in making art is different from having sex. It's sort of saying they both enter us in these sensual ways and they change us. And so I mean, I've rarely seen any other artists do that. I will say something about her dear friend and mine, Carolee Schneemann. Are you familiar with her work? Mm. Yeah. And Carolee also thought of herself as a painter and a filmmaker and a writer. And they actually were both born in exactly the same year, 1939. They both worked extremely hard and boldly with courage to establish their place in the quote art world, which was mostly male. I mean, we know that historically. We can go to the Prado, we can go to the Louvre, and we don't see very much by women, and we still don't, because those are the important pieces from art history. And both of those women wanted to rewrite history or create a new history through their paintings, but also, as you noted, like through their commitment to revealing their own embodied presence in their work, which was not really what Rembrandt was doing, unless he did a portrait, you know, which in film would be called a headshot. You know, they wanted to do something much more fluid and more about the dance of the body on the screen or on a canvas.
Yeah, and I think it's also really interesting that you pointed out, because Barbara Hammer has written quite extensively about how she made these early films and how she wanted the person that was holding the camera to almost make love to the bodies that they were filming, and really get up close and personal. But I think we got another question.
Yes.
So just to follow up on the sensory or tactile aspect, could you tell us a bit more about her influences? Like she's referring to she seems to have a very conscious and also theoretical commitment, in a sense, to this tactility and this is also interesting enough that this seems to be quite a big trend today, like sensory realism, slow cinema, like the program at Lincoln Film Center called Art of the Real, which you might be familiar with. It's all these tactile but also political films, but it's really I see this as quite a big trend actually at festivals around.
Interesting.
So it would be
actually, I want to connect to a question that was asked earlier about her knowledge of the technical aspects of filmmaking. Now, you might think, yawn, why do we need to know about her knowledge of the mechanics, of the properties of celluloid, of the equipment? And Barbara knew the equipment in and out. For example, she knew all the cameras from the Bolex to the Beaulieu to the Arriflex. She could use them. She wanted to connect with that machinery in a totally different way from a director. A director has a director of photography and a cinematographer and executes everything he wants to do by telling a member of his crew, who happens to be making the images, what to do. Barbara wanted to eliminate that. She wanted to hold her tools. And so the holding of the tools what was as important as the what you call the sensory experience. She wanted the sensory experience of the production as well as the performance, or the, you know, and that it may not seem like much, but it's such a departure, because she wanted to learn it as a woman. She wanted to say, you know, I'm just as capable of understanding all aspects of filmmaking as any member of a crew, of a more conventional crew. And then, but I'm going to take that, I'm going to steal it away from the conventions of how women's bodies are observed, for example. And I'm going to explore something that is more textured, more kind of exhilarating in a way that makes us think about these haptic moments. And so you were asking about her influence. Is that what you mean? Like what her influence was on the field?
Oh, yeah. So, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just really curious to hear if this was kind of a trend in the time, the tactile aspect of cinema, or if she was kind of pioneer in that sense as well.
And I noticed in quite a few of the films that we watched, for example, the tactile also is the fragment. So I think that, you know, we've seen images of love making, you know, in throughout narrative film, but love making, you know, making love, that kind of thing, the seduction, all of those things were not what interested her. I think you're like really pointing out something else. Those close-ups give you a sense of touch, is what she called sync touch, like a touch being something much more expansive and transcendent than just sex.
I think we got a follow-up question.
Really great to listen to your talk. I was just thinking, when you talked about the male gaze, about this figure that she has when she rides on the horse, because I can't remember.
Oh, the horse. Yeah.
Because it was just. It felt very much like playing also with the sort of male cowboy meeting with nature, turning that around. Like I thought that was very beautiful, but maybe that was not what she meant at all. But can you explain a little bit more about this?
You know, it's interesting. I just a few days ago saw Jane Campion's new film, which I have you seen The Power of the Dog?
Yes.
Anybody? Some people have, some people haven't, but it's a cowboy movie through and through. It's really an investigation and kind of a you know, a confrontation with masculinity. And the horse is a really big part of it. But one thing that Jane Campion is, you know, probably one of the best known narrative commercial filmmakers, woman filmmakers alive today, if not the best. And then she was just recognized with a Best Director award from the Academy Awards. So, you know, that's a big acknowledgement of her lifelong involvement with cinema. But it was interesting that there is one woman actor, Kristen Dunst, in the film, but she never gets on a horse. You know, only the guys get on the horse. Only the guys get to have that transcendent connection with a horse. Now, personally, when I was a little girl, I was obsessed with horses. I drew a lot of pictures of horses. I think it was like my first like recognition of my own sexuality. If you've ever ridden a horse, you know that it's like it affects your body, your vagina. You feel it as you're riding on the horse. So when I see Barbara riding on a horse, I think, oh yeah, she loves horses, but she also loves that sensory experience of moving on top of the horse. That's not a coincidence. And then the film is also about her own illness and her own confrontation with the mortal coil, with death. And I love the title of that film, A Horse Is Not a Metaphor, because she just takes it all on.
Any more questions?
No?
Nope.
I just had a question, Lynne. Where we haven't seen, I mean, we saw one of your films tonight. Where could we see more?
Oh, great. Thank you for asking. Well, actually, there's a streaming service called DA Films, DAFILMS, that is amazing. And they just this week launched 11 of my films, and they're available globally. Yeah, and they coincidentally they call the program tender nonfiction. So when we used the word tender, it was like, oh, that's what they called it. So it's a great streaming service, and it's really inexpensive. I'm impressed. Like in dollars, it's something like $4 a month.
That's incredible. I mean, send us a link. What was it called? DA.
It's called DA. Oh, I can do it. Right. Can I put it in the Zoom?
Can you?
Not sure.
No, but if you send me a link, I can share it.
It's just DAFILMS, DA Films. So it's an alliance of Doc Leipzig, Doc Lisboa, Film Marseille. There's 7 film festivals around Europe that have gotten together and created DA Films. It's Doc Alliance Films. So, and it really is a website that looks at more alternative films, not just conventional documentaries that you might find otherwise. And then I have 8 films on the Criterion channel, but I don't think that's available in Europe unless you have maybe a VPN. And so I would say Doc Alliance is the best place to see my films streaming right now. And I actually just did an interview, which you can find on there, with a woman named Cynthia Gilles, she's a film curator. She ran Doc Lisboa for years, and then she was the director of the Sheffield Film Festival for the last few years too.
Brilliant. Well, I'll check it out. Definitely.
Thank you.
And I think this conversation could probably go on forever, but we might have reached an end for tonight.
Yeah.
It was so lovely that you took the time to talk to us and to be a part of this event in honor of Barbara. And thank you, the audience, for coming. And I hope to see you again when we have more film program for Queer Culture Year. So thank you very much.
And thank you, Lynne. And thank you,
Lynne.
Kunstnernes Hus. And Ayman.